Lakeside Commons had been built the way most good things in Ashgrove were built, slowly, argued over, and eventually beloved by everyone who used it. 40 years ago it had been an old industrial lot choking on rust and broken glass. Now it was 300 acres of restored wetland, walking trails, a wildlife rehabilitation center, and a community park that hosted everything from Sunday farmers' markets to the town's biggest festivals. It was one of the first places in Ashgrove where humans and Vulpines had built something together instead of simply agreeing to tolerate each other's presence, back when that distinction still mattered to people. Now, decades later, nobody thought twice about it. Fox-eared children chased human children across the same grass. Old Vulpine men played chess with old human men under the same maple trees. It was, by every measure, a peaceful place. Caleb Hartley had been volunteering there for 6 years. He was 28, a carpenter by trade, with calloused hands and sawdust that never quite washed out of the creases of his knuckles. During the week he built cabinets and repaired barns and once, memorably, constructed an entire chicken coop shaped like a lighthouse for an old woman who'd said she wanted something with dignity for her hens. On Saturdays, he came to Lakeside Commons before sunrise and fixed whatever the park needed fixing: a loose plank on the boardwalk, a sagging gate, a bench with a broken slat. It was quiet work, and he liked it precisely because it asked nothing of him except attention and patience, 2 things he had in steady supply. It was on a Saturday in early April, kneeling on the boardwalk with a mouthful of nails, that he first saw her. She was sitting near the willow tree at the east end of the lake, in the spot where the boardwalk widened into a small overlook. She was in a wheelchair, sleek, well-made, clearly her own rather than a rental, parked at an angle that let her watch both the water and the walking path. She had a book open in her lap, though she wasn't reading it. Her hands, small and fine-boned, were scattering breadcrumbs to a cluster of mallards that had learned, evidently, that she was a reliable source of breakfast. She had russet-colored fur along her jaw and the backs of her hands, fading into more human-toned skin at her throat, and a pair of fox ears that swiveled attentively toward every sound: the ducks, the wind in the willow, a child's laughter 300 feet away. Her tail, tucked neatly at her side, occasionally flicked when a particularly bold duck got too close to her shoe. She wore a soft green sweater and had her hair pulled back in a simple braid, and she was, Caleb thought without meaning to think it at all, breathtaking. He didn't stare. He'd learned a long time ago that staring at anyone, Vulpine or human, was rude, and staring at a beautiful woman alone in a park was the kind of thing that made a person feel like an object rather than a person. So he went back to his nails and his boards, and did not look again for nearly 20 minutes. When he did look up, she was still there, alone. The family strolling past nodded politely at her, the way people nod at furniture they don't want to bump into. A young Vulpine couple walked by, arms around each other, and the man's eyes flicked to her. Just for a second, with an expression Caleb didn't like. Not unkind exactly. Just dismissive. Already finished with the thought before it had really formed. Oh. Wheelchair. Moving on. She noticed it too. Caleb saw the small, practiced way she turned her attention back to the ducks, as if she hadn't seen, as if it hadn't landed anywhere. He thought about that for the rest of the day, off and on, in the way a splinter makes itself known even after you've stopped looking at your hand. The next Saturday, she was there again. Same spot. Same wheelchair. Same book unread in her lap. This time Caleb finished his repairs early and found himself, almost without deciding to, walking down toward the willow with 2 coffees from the cart near the entrance. "I don't know if you drink coffee," he said, feeling suddenly and thoroughly foolish, "but I bought 2 by accident, and it seemed like a waste to pour one out." She looked up at him with an expression of pure surprise. Not wariness, not the guarded politeness she'd worn for the strolling families, but genuine surprise, as if she hadn't expected to be spoken to at all. "That's a very specific kind of accident," she said after a moment. Her voice was low and a little wry, with the faint rounded vowels of someone who'd grown up somewhere near the coast. I have a lot of specific accidents, Caleb said. Mostly involving lumber. This one just happened to involve coffee. She almost smiled. Almost. I take it black. Good. That's the one in my left hand, so I don't have to feel bad about my aim. She took it, and their fingers brushed for half a second, and Caleb noted, in the careful, cataloging way carpenters notice the grain of wood, that her hand was warm, and that she held the cup like someone who hadn't been handed anything freely in a long time. Caleb, he said, I fix things on the boardwalk. Badly some days. Wren, she said. I feed ducks. Badly most days. I think half of them are getting fat purely out of spite. He laughed, and something in her face shifted at the sound of it, some old tension easing half a degree, like a board settling into place. He didn't stay long that first time. He didn't want to make a project out of her, the way he suspected other people had, in their own clumsy ways, tried to make a project out of her kindness or her sadness or her circumstances. He drank his coffee, talked about nothing. The ducks, the weather, a leak he found in the boathouse roof, and then went back to his boards. But the next Saturday, he brought 2 coffees again. And the Saturday after that, he brought a paper bag of blueberry muffins from the bakery near his shop, and asked if he could sit, and she said yes. It became a ritual without either of them naming it as one. Caleb would finish his morning repairs, and Wren would be there in her spot by the willow, and he would settle onto the bench beside her wheelchair, angled so they were shoulder to shoulder rather than facing each other, which she seemed to prefer, though either of them ever discussed why, and they would talk. He learned, in pieces over the weeks. She was 31. She had grown up 2 hours north, in a coastal town full of cliffs and fishing boats, and she had loved to climb. Real climbing, technical routes, the kind that required ropes and chalk and nerve. She'd been good at it. Better than good. She'd been 3 pitches up a face called Widow's Column, 6 years ago, when a hold that 100 other climbers had trusted simply gave way beneath her hand. She didn't tell him the whole story at once. She gave it to him the way you hand someone something breakable. A little at a time, watching his face for the flinch, the pity, the too careful gentleness that she had apparently come to dread more than the accident itself. Caleb never flinched. He asked good questions, not about the fall, but about the climbing. What it had felt like to be 300 feet up with nothing beneath her but air and trust. What she missed most. Whether she still dreamed about it. I dream about the top, she told him one Saturday, watching a heron pick its way along the shallows. Not the fall. Never the fall. Just reaching the top, and being able to see everything at once. I miss that most. Not the climbing itself. The seeing. You still see plenty, Caleb said. You see this whole park like it's yours. I've watched you clock every person who walks past for 6 weeks running. That's just habit, she said. Old habit. Route reading. You learn to read a cliff face before you touch it, where the good holds are, where it'll give way. I guess I never stopped doing it. I just do it to people now instead of rock. What have you read on me? She considered him for a long moment, her ears tipping forward, that assessing look he was coming to recognize and, if he was honest, coming to crave. That you ask questions you actually want the answers to. Most people ask questions as a formality. You ask like you're going to remember what I say. I am going to remember, he said. I remember everything you tell me. She looked away first, out at the water, and he saw her throat move as she swallowed something down. Hope, maybe, or the fear of hope, which he was beginning to understand was a far heavier thing to carry. What Caleb never told her, in those early weeks, was how much he noticed. He noticed that she'd learned to angle her wheelchair so that people had to actively choose to walk around and face her, rather than simply passing by unseen. He noticed that she always arrived early and left late, as if trying to maximize whatever thin thread of normal human contact the park could offer her before retreating home to whatever quiet apartment she disappeared into. He noticed the small, private wince that crossed her face whenever a young couple passed too close, holding hands, and how quickly she smoothed it away. He noticed the book in her lap was always the same one, dog-eared, a paperback field guide to shorebirds, its spine cracked from repeated opening to the same 3 pages. "You've read the whole guide," he said one day, nodding at it. "But you always open to the same section." "Sandpipers," she said. "I like sandpipers. They run right up to the edge of the wave, and then dart back just before it catches them. Every single time. Thousands of years of instinct telling them exactly how close they can get to the danger before it swallows them whole. Sounds exhausting. It's the only thing that makes sense to me some days," she said quietly. "Knowing exactly how close is safe." Caleb didn't answer right away. He watched a duck upend itself in the shallows, tail in the air, and thought about the careful distance she kept from everyone, from hope, from touch, from the possibility of being wanted, and understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that he intended to close that distance. Slowly. Without asking permission first, because permission required naming the thing before it was ready to be named, and some things, like joints in good furniture, needed time to set before you tested their strength. "I think," he said finally, "that some things are worth swimming out past where the wave can catch you. Even if it's terrifying." She looked at him sideways, ears twitching. "That's a very unsubtle thing to say to a woman who studies bird behavior as a coping mechanism." "I'm a carpenter, not a poet. Subtlety isn't really in my toolbox." That startled a real laugh out of her, sudden and bright, the kind that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him, and a passing family glanced over, and for once, Wren didn't shrink from being seen. Ashgrove was not a cruel town. It had integrated humans and Vulpines decades before most places had managed it gracefully, and it liked to think of itself, with some justification, as a kind place. But kindness and true attention are not the same thing, and Caleb began to notice, as spring gave way to early summer, that his Saturday visits to the willow tree had not gone entirely unremarked. It started small. The woman who ran the coffee cart began packing his black coffee and Wren's in the same cardboard tray without being asked, and gave him a knowing look that he pretended not to see. Old Mrs. Alconquo, who fed squirrels near the boathouse and considered herself the park's unofficial historian, cornered him one Saturday to ask, with the bluntness only the very elderly can get away with, "Are you courting that Ashford girl, or are you just being neighborly? Because the whole park's taken a side and I'd like to know which one I'm on." "I don't think it's anybody's business either way," Caleb said. "Course it's my business," Mrs. Alconquo said. "I've been watching that girl sit alone under that willow for 3 years and it's the saddest thing this park's got, sadder than the geese with the bad leg. If you're the thing that fixes it, I want to know so I can stop feeling sad about my Saturdays." It wasn't all kindly meddling, though. Caleb overheard, more than once, the uglier version of the same curiosity. A pair of young men near the boathouse one afternoon, not bothering to lower their voices, one of them saying something about charity work, and the other laughing in a way that made Caleb's hands curl into fists before he made himself walk on. He never told Wren about that particular conversation. Some splinters, he decided, a person was better off not being handed. He did tell Iris, though. Wren's oldest friend, a sharp-tongued Vulpine woman with gray-tipped ears who worked at the town clinic and who Caleb had met properly for the first time in early June, when she'd shown up at the willow tree unannounced and studied him for a long, silent moment before declaring, "So you're the carpenter." "I'm the carpenter," Caleb agreed. "She talks about you constantly," Iris said, ignoring Wren's immediate and mortified protest. "Constantly, Caleb. It's actually gotten a little exhausting. I used to hear about sandpipers. Now I hear about you and sandpipers, roughly in that order of frequency, and I am begging you not to be secretly terrible, because I don't think either of us could survive it. I'll do my best not to be secretly terrible. See that you don't." Iris had looked at him a moment longer, some fierce and protective calculation running behind her eyes, and then, apparently satisfied, had softened. "She's had 6 years of people being kind to her from a very careful distance. If you're going to do this, don't do it from a distance. She'll forgive almost anything except being handled gently. It was, Caleb thought later, some of the best advice anyone had ever given him, and he took it seriously enough that when the ugly comments did occasionally reach him, the assumption that he was slumming, or performing saintliness, or settling for something lesser because he couldn't get anything better, he made a point of never softening his teasing, never editing his arguments with Wren, never treating her as anything other than exactly the formidable, sharp-witted, occasionally infuriating woman she actually was. It was the only answer he had for people who thought loving her required some kind of heroic sacrifice. Refusing, flatly, to perform sacrifice at all. He wasn't giving anything up. He'd never once felt like he was. Wren noticed the town's attention too, of course. She'd spent 6 years learning to read a crowd's temperature the way she'd once read a rock face, and she clocked every sideways glance, every whispered aside, with the same flat, practiced calm she brought to everything that hurt her. "They think you're a saint," she said to him one Saturday, not quite looking at him. "Or a fool." "I've heard both this week. Nobody's landed yet on the possibility that you might just actually want to be here." "Then they're bad at reading rock faces," Caleb said. "Because I thought that was your specialty. What does your read say?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the ducks. "My read says you've shown up 11 Saturdays in a row and haven't once looked like you were somewhere you'd rather not be." "Then trust your read," Caleb said. "You're better at this than the coffee cart woman." It was late May, the lake gone gold-green with early summer, when she finally told him the rest of it, not the fall itself, which she'd described plainly enough weeks before, but the part underneath the fall, the part she'd never said out loud to anyone. They'd taken to walking, wheeling and walking, she corrected him, the first time he'd used the wrong word and she'd laughed instead of bristling. Along the north loop of the trail, where the boardwalk gave way to a paved path wide enough for two. Caleb had gotten good, without ever announcing that he was doing it, at finding routes with gentle grades and solid surfaces, at noticing which benches had room enough for a wheelchair to pull alongside rather than being wedged awkwardly at the end. "Can I tell you something ugly?" she asked, apropos of nothing, as they paused at the overlook where the trail crested a small rise. "You can tell me anything," Caleb said. "I don't have a return policy on things people tell me." She huffed a small laugh, but her hands had gone still in her lap. "After the accident, everyone kept saying how strong I was. How brave. How inspiring." She said the word like it tasted bad. "And I let them say it, because it was easier than telling the truth, which is that I wasn't brave at all. I was just alive, and being alive after a thing like that isn't bravery, it's just biology. Momentum. The body keeps going whether you want it to or not. What's the truth, then? The truth is that the fall wasn't the worst part." She stared out at the water. "The worst part was 6 months later, at my cousin's wedding. I was sitting at the edge of the reception, same as always, and I watched every single person in that room dance except me. And I realized, really realized, not just as an abstract fact but as a fact about my actual future, that I was going to spend the rest of my life watching. That nobody was ever going to choose the version of me that comes with a wheelchair attached, when there are 100 versions of women out there who don't. Why would they? Love is supposed to be easy. I stopped being easy the day that hold broke. Wren, I'm not finished." Her voice was steady, but her ears had flattened, just slightly. The way he'd learned meant she was holding something down by force. "I used to think the accident took my legs. It didn't, not really. I mean, it did, obviously, but that's not the thing I actually lost. What it took was the assumption. The assumption that someone would want me. I used to just assume it, the way you assume the sun's going to come up. I don't assume it anymore. I've watched enough people's faces do the math in real time, pretty, but interesting, but kind, but to know exactly where that math always lands." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Not because he didn't have words, but because he wanted to choose the right ones, The way he chose the right joint for a piece of furniture, not the fastest one, not the easiest one, but the one that would hold. "I'm not doing math," he said finally. "I stopped doing math about you somewhere around the second cup of coffee. I'm not sitting here weighing what you have against what you don't have. I like you, Wren. Not despite anything. Not but. I like the woman who reads the same 3 pages about sandpipers 100 times because they make sense to her. I like the woman who's read every person in this park like a climbing route since the day I met her. I like the way you laugh like you're surprised you're allowed to. That's not a consolation prize version of liking someone. That's just liking someone. All the way through." She didn't answer. Her eyes had gone bright, and she was blinking hard, staring fixedly at a heron across the water, as if it required intense study. "You don't have to say anything," Caleb said gently. "I just needed you to know I wasn't doing the math you think I'm doing." "I'm scared," she admitted, so quietly the wind almost took it. "I'm scared that if I let myself believe you, and I'm wrong, I don't think I survive being wrong again." "Then don't believe me yet," Caleb said. "Just let me keep showing up. Belief can come later. Showing up, I can do starting right now." He held out his hand, not to pull her into anything, not to declare anything, just an open hand, resting on the arm of her chair, close enough to take if she wanted it. For a long moment she looked at it like it might be a trick. Then she took it. Summer moved through Ashgrove the way it always did. Long evenings, the lake full of paddleboats and shrieking children, the farmer's market doubling in size every few weeks as the harvest came in. Caleb kept showing up. That was, he'd decided, going to be his whole strategy. No grand declarations, no speeches, just relentless, unglamorous, Saturday after Saturday showing up. The way you prove a beam is load-bearing by putting weight on it again and again until nobody doubts it anymore. He fixed the ramp at the boathouse without being asked, after he noticed Wren struggling with a section where age had warped the wood into a treacherous list. He learned, from her offhand comments, exactly which of the park's dozen benches had room for her chair to pull up flush beside them, and made it his business to repair the 2 that didn't, quietly, on a Tuesday when she wasn't there to see him do it. He brought his old truck around one Saturday and, with her tentative permission, took her out past the park entirely, out along the coast road to the cliffs above Widow's Column, and sat beside her in companionable silence while she looked, for the first time in 6 years, at the rock that had changed her life, not with grief, he was relieved to see, but with something more like reunion. "I thought I'd hate seeing it again," she admitted, watching gulls wheel around the granite face. "And I don't hate it. I think I just needed someone to sit with me while I looked at it instead of looking away." He learned her coffee order, her favorite bird species, kestrels, for their stubborn ferocity, though she'd never admit that was the reason, the exact tone of voice that meant she was joking versus the nearly identical tone that meant she was testing whether he'd flinch. He learned that she hated the word, inspiring, and loved terrible puns, that she'd once broken a childhood friendship over a disagreement about whether crows were smarter than parrots, she remained convinced they were, and that she cried, silently and without any warning at all, during nature documentaries about migratory birds completing impossible journeys. He never once, in all those months, treated her like something fragile. He argued with her about books. He teased her mercilessly about her stubborn insistence that sandpipers had more personality than any other shorebird. He let her win exactly as many arguments as she deserved to win and not one more, and she seemed, gradually, to trust that more than any amount of gentleness could have earned. It was in late August, on the boardwalk at dusk, with the lake gone the color of a bruise and the first stars pricking through, that she finally asked him the question she'd clearly been carrying for weeks. "Why me?" she said. "Out of everyone. There are 100 women in this town who don't come with—" She gestured at the chair, the words still difficult for her to say plainly even now. "Complications." Caleb considered the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. "You know how you can tell good wood from bad wood," he said. "Not the pretty ones, the good ones. The ones that'll hold weight for 80 years without warping. It's never the smoothest piece in the stack. It's the piece that's been through weather. Wood that's had to fight for its grain is denser. Stronger. It holds a joint better than anything that grew up easy. He looked at her steady. You're not a complication, Wren. You're old growth. Everyone else out there is still working with green lumber. I found the good stuff. She stared at him, and then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a wet, startled, disbelieving laugh. Did you just compare me to a 2x4? I compared you to old-growth heartwood, which is a significant upgrade from a 2x4, and if you don't appreciate the metaphor, that's a you problem. I can't believe I'm falling for a man who thinks in lumber terminology. The word falling hung in the air between them, and she seemed to hear herself say it a half-second after it had already left her mouth, her ears going rigid with the sudden urge to take it back. Caleb didn't let her. Good, he said simply. Because I fell a long time ago. Somewhere around the second Saturday, if you're keeping records. It happened in September, 3 weeks before the gathering, and it happened over something small enough that Caleb spent days afterward turning it over in his hands like a board he couldn't figure out how to plane straight. They'd gone, for the first time, to a proper dinner, not the park, not the coast road, but an actual restaurant downtown, at Wren's own suggestion, a small step she'd taken with visible effort toward letting their life together exist somewhere other than the willow tree. It had gone well, right up until an old friend of Caleb's from high school had stopped by their table, warm and friendly and utterly unthinking, and said cheerfully, within Wren's full hearing, "Caleb Hartley, look at you! Didn't figure you for the type to settle down with." A pause, a flicker of the eyes toward the wheelchair, a too-late correction. "I mean, that's great, man. Good for you. That's really good of you. Good of you." Caleb had corrected him on the spot, sharp enough that the man had gone red and mumbled an apology, and left quickly. But the words had already landed, and he watched them land, watched something in Wren go quiet and careful in a way he hadn't seen in months, not since the earliest days by the willow, when she'd still been testing whether his kindness would survive contact with an audience. She didn't say much for the rest of the dinner. She smiled in the right places. She answered his questions. But it was a different smile than the one he'd learned to recognize as hers, and by the time he'd wheeled her home, the silence between them had a weight to it he didn't know how to lift. "Talk to me," he said, at her door, when she made no move to invite him in. "There's nothing to talk about," she said. "It was a nice dinner. Wren. I'm tired, Caleb. That's all it is." It wasn't all it was, and they both knew it, and for the first time in 6 months he let her close the door without pushing, because some doors, he understood, didn't open faster for being pushed. She didn't come to the willow tree the next Saturday. He went anyway, out of habit as much as hope, and sat on the empty bench with 2 coffees, one of them going cold, and understood with a slow, sick certainty exactly what was happening. She was doing the math again. The math she told him about that very first summer, the math she'd sworn she'd stopped doing on his account, except now some stranger's careless words had reintroduced the variable she'd never fully believed had left the equation, that everyone, eventually, would come to see him as a man doing something charitable, rather than a man simply, ordinarily, in love. He called her that evening. She didn't answer. He called the next day, and the day after that, and on the 3rd day, Iris called him instead. "She thinks she's protecting you," Iris said without preamble. "That's the whole thing. It's not that she doubts you. It's that she's convinced herself that loving her is going to cost you something, friendships, that man's easy friendliness, a lifetime of people saying good of you at dinner parties. And she'd rather end it now, while it still looks like a choice, than watch you slowly resent the cost of it." "That's not how it works," Caleb said. "That's not how I work." "I know that," Iris said. "You know that. Wren's the one who spent 6 years watching the world confirm her worst assumption about herself, over and over, until believing anything else feels like standing on a ledge with no rope. One idiot at a dinner said 4 careless words and it undid 6 months of you proving otherwise, because that's what old wounds do, Caleb. They don't heal in a straight line. Sometimes they reopen over nothing at all. So what do I do? You don't fix it with more proof, Iris said. She has plenty of proof. She's not short on evidence. What she's short on is belief that she's allowed to keep the good thing without it eventually being taken from her. That's not something you argue her out of. That's something you have to just stay through. So Caleb stayed. He didn't call again for 4 days, giving her the room Iris had told him she needed. Instead, on the 5th day, he went to the willow tree at the exact hour they always met, and he brought 2 coffees, and he sat on the empty bench, and he waited. Not to catch her, not to ambush her with an argument, but simply to be present in the place they belonged to each other, in case she found her way back to it. She came on the 6th day. She wheeled up slowly, uncertain, her eyes red-rimmed in a way that told him the week had cost her as much as it had cost him, and she stopped a few feet short of the bench as if she still hadn't decided whether she had the right to close the distance. "I'm sorry," she said before he could say anything at all. "I panicked. Someone said 4 stupid words and I spent a week convincing myself I was doing you a favor by ending things before you figured out you deserved better than a favor to begin with." "I don't want a favor," Caleb said quietly. "I never wanted a favor. I want you. The actual, entire, complicated you. The version that reads sandpiper facts 100 times over and picks fights about crows and pulls away from people who love her because she's more scared of being left than she's ever admitted out loud. That version. I'm not interested in a version of you that's easier to explain at dinner parties." Her breath hitched, and she looked down at her hands. "I'm scared I'll do this again. Pull away. Every time some idiot says the wrong thing." "Then we'll have this conversation again," Caleb said simply. "As many times as it takes. I'm not going anywhere, Wren. Not because I'm noble. Because I don't want to be anywhere else." She reached out, finally, and took the coffee from his hand, and her fingers were cold, and she held on a beat longer than she needed to. "I don't deserve you," she said. "Wrong," Caleb said. "You've just never been given the chance to believe you do. I intend to keep giving it to you until the belief outlasts the doubt. However long that takes." The gathering of mates came once a year, in the first cool week of autumn, when the maples along the lake turned to fire and the whole town of Ashgrove, human and Vulpine alike, though the tradition itself was old and entirely Vulpine, turned out for the festival grounds at Lakeside Commons. It was, Wren had explained to him once, one of the oldest surviving Vulpine customs from before the integration, a public declaration ceremony where couples who had chosen each other for life stood before their families and communities and said so, plainly, in front of everyone who mattered. "It's not a wedding," she told him back in the spring, long before either of them had said anything about them out loud. "Weddings are private, legal, practical things. This is older than that. This is about being witnessed. About your community looking at the two of you and understanding, permanently, that you belong to each other now. There's no going back from it, not really. Once you're declared, you're declared." "Sounds terrifying," he'd said then, not knowing yet how much the conversation would matter. "It's supposed to be a little terrifying," she'd said. "Anything worth declaring should cost you something to say." As the festival approached that autumn, their festival, the one that would fall during the 7th month of whatever it was that had grown between them, Caleb noticed Wren growing quieter. Not sad exactly. Braced. Like a woman watching weather roll in from a long way off. "You're not coming this year," she said to him one evening, not quite meeting his eyes as they sat by the willow watching the last of the daylight burn out over the water. "The gathering. You don't have to. I know it's not really. It's not your custom." "Nobody would think anything of it." "I want to come," Caleb said carefully. "Do you not want me there?" "I don't want me there," she said, and the honesty of it seemed to cost her. "Every year I watch it from the far edge, near the parking lot, where nobody has to see me watching. And every year it gets a little harder, and this year. She stopped. This year what? This year I have something to lose that I didn't have before, she said. Watching everyone else declare their whole lives to each other used to just be sad. Now it's going to be sad, and it's going to remind me of a thing I want and I don't. Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word. I don't think I could sit there and watch it, knowing what I want and knowing I'll never be the one standing in the middle of that circle. Nobody wheels a woman in a chair into the center of that ceremony. Nobody's ever done it. It's not built for someone like me. I'd just embarrass us both. Ren. I mean it, Caleb. I've thought about this a lot. I'd rather stay home this year. I'd rather not. She shook her head hard, blinking fast. I don't want to watch something I can't have. Caleb reached over and took her hand, the way he had 100 times since that first afternoon at the Overlook, and held it until she looked at him. Okay, he said quietly. You don't have to come if you don't want to. I'm not going to talk you into anything you're not ready for. Something in her shoulders loosened, relieved, and she squeezed his hand and looked back out at the water, and neither of them said anything else about it that night. But Caleb had lied to her, just once, in all the months they'd known each other. He had no intention of letting her miss it. He didn't tell her what he was planning, because he understood, with the same instinct that told him which board would hold weight and which would warp under pressure, that if he asked her permission she would say no, not out of stubbornness, but out of genuine terror. The kind that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with 6 years of watching 100 small dismissals accumulate into a wall she no longer believed anyone could climb. So instead, in the 2 weeks before the gathering, Caleb went to work the way he went to work on everything, quietly, thoroughly, with his hands. He went to Ren's parents first, a 2-hour drive up the coast, and sat in their kitchen and told them, plainly, what he intended to do. Her mother cried, both hands pressed to her mouth, and asked him 3 times whether he was certain, not because she doubted him but because she needed, after 6 years of watching her daughter fold herself smaller and smaller, to hear the certainty confirmed aloud until it felt real. Her father, a weathered ex-fisherman with Ren's same steady eyes, said almost nothing at all for a long stretch, simply studying Caleb across the kitchen table with the flat, assessing look of a man who had spent 40 years reading weather off the color of the sky. Finally he'd stood, crossed the kitchen, and gripped Caleb's hand hard enough to bruise. She used to climb because she needed to feel like the world couldn't hold her down, he said. After the accident she stopped believing anything could hold her up instead. You're telling me you built something that could? He nodded once, sharp and final. It's about damn time somebody did. Ren's mother packed him a container of her own honey cake for the drive home and made him promise, 3 separate times at the door, to call the moment it was done. Good or bad, she said, she wanted to know the moment it was done. He went to the festival committee next, and to the town elders who oversaw the gathering's traditions. Osgood received him in the small stone hall behind the community chapel where the old ceremonial records were kept, a room that smelled of beeswax and cedar and seemed, to Caleb, like the inside of a very old, very patient tree. Osgood listened to the whole plan without interrupting, his gray-muzzled face unreadable, and then spent a long moment paging through a ledger bound in cracked leather, tracing a claw along lines of handwriting 2 centuries old. You want to know if the tradition has room for her? Osgood said finally, not quite a question. I want to know if I'm about to break something sacred by trying, Caleb said honestly. I'd rather ask first and be told no, than do it wrong in front of the whole town and hurt her worse than the silence already has. Osgood studied him a moment longer, then turned the ledger around so Caleb could see the old script, the faded ink. The rite says only that the couple arrive together, before witnesses, and speak their choice plainly. It says nothing about how they arrive. 200 years ago a groom missing a leg from the border wars was carried into that circle on his brother's back, and nobody thought less of the vow for it. The custom has never once been about legs, Mr. Hartley. It's only ever been about whether 2 people are brave enough to be seen choosing each other. Nobody has done it from a wheelchair only because nobody has ever tried, and I confess I've wondered, more than once these last few years, why not? He closed the ledger with a soft, final sound. Build your ramp. Build your dais. The circle will hold whatever weight two honest people bring into it. Then we'll be the first, Caleb said, and something in his chest, some knot he hadn't realized he was carrying, finally loosened. He spoke to Wren's oldest friend, a Vulpine woman named Iris who had known her since childhood and who agreed, immediately and fiercely, to help. He spoke to the park groundskeepers about the terrain of the festival grounds and where the ceremonial circle would be laid that year, and quietly arranged, under the guise of his usual Saturday repairs, for a smooth, level path to be built directly from the parking area to the circle's edge, wide enough and firm enough for a wheelchair to cross without a single jolt. He built the last piece himself, in his own workshop, over 3 long nights. A low wooden dais, no more than 6 inches high, with a gentle ramped approach on every side, sized precisely to the width of Wren's chair, sanded until it was smoother than a duck's wing and finished until the grain of the reclaimed oak glowed like amber. He wanted her, when the moment came, to be raised up level with everyone else in that circle, not lifted out of her chair, not made into something she wasn't, but simply given the same eyeline as every other person there. He inlaid a small line of pale birch along the dais's edge, in the shape, if you looked closely, of a sandpiper mid-stride. He told no one what he felt while he built it. But his hands, steady on every other piece of furniture he'd ever made, shook more than once. The morning of the gathering, Caleb arrived at Wren's apartment before 8, dressed not in his usual work clothes but in a dark green button-down that Iris had helped him pick out weeks earlier, his hair actually combed, his hands scrubbed raw of sawdust for the first time in years. Wren answered the door in soft gray clothes, clearly dressed for a quiet day at home, her hair loose instead of braided, her eyes red-rimmed in a way that told him she'd already been crying that morning, alone, at the sound of festival music drifting up from the lake 2 miles away. "Caleb," she said, startled. "I told you I wasn't going." "I know," he said. "I'm not here to make you go. I'm here because I don't want to spend today anywhere you're not, and if you're staying home, then I'm staying home too. Duck feeding at your kitchen window, if that's what today is." She stared at him for a long moment, something in her face fighting itself. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said again. "I want to." He came in. He made her tea, badly, the way he always did, and she laughed at his terrible tea the way she always did, and for an hour they sat at her small kitchen table while the sound of drums and fiddle music floated faintly up from the direction of the lake, and Caleb watched her listen to it with an expression of such careful, controlled longing that it nearly broke something in his chest. "Do you want to tell me about it?" he asked gently. "What it's like? The ceremony?" She hesitated, then began to describe it. The circle of torches lit at dusk, the whole community gathered in concentric rings, the couples walking in one by one to stand at the center and speak their names and their choice out loud, the old Vulpine words that meant, roughly, "I have looked, and I have chosen, and I will not look again." As she spoke, her voice grew steadier, warmer, until she was almost smiling, lost in the shape of the tradition even while insisting she wanted no part of it. "It sounds beautiful," Caleb said when she'd finished. "It is," she admitted. "It always was. I just used to belong to it before. Now I just watch." "What if I told you," Caleb said carefully, "that I already spoke to your parents? And to Iris? And to Osgood, and the festival committee? And that there's a path built from the parking lot straight to the circle that didn't exist 2 weeks ago? And that I built something with my own hands that's waiting there for you right now?" Wren went very still. "Caleb," she whispered. "What did you do?" "I built you a way in," he said. "That's all. I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for. But I couldn't let today happen without at least giving you the choice. You've spent 6 years watching from the parking lot. I just wanted you to know the door's actually open if you want to walk." He caught himself, smiled. If you want to go through it. Her eyes filled, and for a long moment she said nothing at all, staring down at her hands in her lap the way she had that very first day by the willow. I'm terrified, she said finally. I know. What if it goes wrong? What if everyone stares? What if it's a spectacle? What if? Then it goes wrong, Caleb said simply. And we'll have tried, and I'll still be exactly where I am right now, which is completely, entirely certain about you. But Wren, I don't think it goes wrong. I think you've spent 6 years assuming the worst version of a story that hasn't been written yet. I'd like to write a different ending with you. Today, if you'll let me. She looked at him for a long, long moment, reading him, he understood, the way she read a rock face before she trusted her weight to it, checking every hold for the give that would send her falling again. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Let's go. The festival grounds at dusk were exactly as she described them, torches ringing the great lawn in concentric circles, the low gold light catching on foxfur and human faces alike, fiddles and drums weaving through the crowd's low murmur of anticipation. Hundreds of people had gathered, the whole town turned out in its best clothes, children hoisted onto shoulders for a better view, old couples standing arm in arm to watch the young ones make their declarations. Caleb wheeled Wren along the new smooth path from the parking area, feeling her hand grip the armrest of her chair so tightly her knuckles had gone pale beneath her fur. She hadn't said a word since they'd arrived, her ears pinned flat with nerves, her breath coming fast and shallow. You don't have to do this, he murmured close to her ear, as they reached the outer ring of torches and the crowd began, subtly, to notice them. Yes, I do, she said, so quietly it was almost lost in the fiddle music. I've spent 6 years not doing this. I'm done not doing things. The whispers started small, at the edges, a nudge, a pointed glance, the particular rustle of a crowd registering something unexpected. Wren's ears flattened further, and Caleb felt her hand find his and grip it hard enough to hurt. Eyes on me, he said softly. Just look at me. Let them look at whatever they want to look at. You look at me. She did. She fixed her eyes on his face and held them there, and he wheeled her forward, past the outer ring, past the second, toward the center where Osgood stood waiting with the ceremonial torch, his weathered face creased in something like pride. The dais was exactly where Caleb had left it 2 nights before, smooth oak glowing amber in the torchlight, the little inlaid sandpiper catching the light along its edge. He guided her chair up the gentle ramp until she sat level, for the first time in 6 years, at the same height as everyone else gathered in that circle. The murmuring crowd had gone quiet now, hundreds of faces turned toward the center, and Wren's breath was coming fast, her eyes still fixed on Caleb's, as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. Caleb Hartley knelt. He knelt on the grass in front of her chair, in front of the whole gathered town, in front of torchlight and fiddle music and hundreds of years of tradition, and he took both her hands in his. My name is Caleb Hartley, he said, and his voice, to his own surprise, came out steady and clear, carrying easily across the silent circle. 6 months ago I met a woman by a willow tree who fed ducks and read the same 3 pages about sandpipers 100 times over, and I have not stopped thinking about her since. I have looked at every part of her, the parts she's proud of and the parts she still finds hard to look at herself, and I have chosen her. Not despite anything. Not as a kindness, not as a consolation, not with an asterisk. I have chosen Wren Ashford entirely, for exactly who she is, and I will not look again, because I have already found what I was looking for. He heard her breath catch, saw the tears finally spill over that she'd been holding back all evening, and he held her gaze steady as he said the last of it. Wren. In front of everyone who matters to us both, you are my mate. You have been for a while now. If I'm honest, I was just waiting for the right circle of torches to say it in. You are not someone anybody should ever have overlooked. You are the person I choose, today and every day after it, for the rest of however long we get. For a moment the whole gathering held its breath. Then Wren, tears streaming freely down her face, laughed, That same startled, disbelieving laugh he'd first heard by the willow tree, the one that always sounded like she couldn't quite believe she was allowed to feel that good, and said, loud enough for the whole circle to hear, I have looked at a great many terrible cups of tea, Caleb Hartley, and I have chosen to drink them anyway, for 6 months running, which should tell you everything about how thoroughly I've already chosen you back. The crowd, uncertain for a half-second whether to laugh or weep, did both at once, and the sound of it rolled out across the lawn like a wave breaking. Say it properly, Osgood said, laughing himself. For the record, girl. Wren wiped her eyes, straightened in her chair, and looked at Caleb with a fierceness that erased, for one full breath, every year of watching from the parking lot. I have looked, she said, and I have chosen. Caleb Hartley is my mate, and I will not look again, because there is nothing left anywhere in this world that I would rather be looking at. The crowd erupted. Torches were raised. Somewhere a fiddle struck up something bright and fast, and children cheered without entirely understanding why, and Wren's parents pushed through the inner ring with tears streaming down both their faces, and Iris was sobbing openly into another friend's shoulder, and for the first time in 6 years, not a single person in that circle was looking at the wheelchair. They were looking at two people, deeply, unmistakably in love. Caleb rose from his knees and kissed her, right there in the center of the torchlit circle, and Wren's hands came up to frame his face the way she might once have framed a rock face she trusted completely. And when they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time, and the whole town of Ashgrove was cheering around them like the tide coming in. They stayed by the lake long after the festival had wound down, the torches burning low, most of the crowd dispersed toward home and warm beds. Wren's chair sat parked at the edge of the water, and Caleb sat on the grass beside her, exactly the way he had that very first Saturday, though nothing at all was the same anymore. You built me a dais, she said, running her fingers along the smooth oak edge, tracing the little inlaid sandpiper. You built me an entire ramp system. You drove 2 hours to talk to my parents without telling me. You are, genuinely, the most quietly relentless man I have ever met. I told you, Caleb said. I don't have subtlety in my toolbox. Just showing up. Repeatedly. Until the thing holds. It's holding, she said softly, looking out at the dark water where, somewhere in the reeds, a sandpiper was surely asleep with its head tucked beneath its wing, done for the night with running toward the edge of danger and darting safely back. I don't think I need to run from the wave anymore. Good, Caleb said, taking her hand. Because I intend to keep showing up for a very, very long time. Saturdays. Tuesdays. Every ordinary day in between. I've got a lot of years of relentless left in me. Wren smiled, the real smile, the one she'd once tried so hard to hide from a park full of people who never stopped to look closely enough to see it, and leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they watched the last torch gutter out over Lakeside Commons, while the lake went dark and calm and utterly, peacefully certain beneath a sky full of early stars. The willow tree looked exactly the same the following autumn, its long branches trailing gold into water gone glassy with early frost, and if you'd walked the boardwalk that particular Saturday morning you would have found the same overlook, the same cluster of mallards, the same woman in the same well-made wheelchair. Except that now there were 2 coffee cups instead of one arriving by accident, and a ring on her hand that caught the morning light every time she reached out to scatter breadcrumbs, and a man kneeling nearby with a toolbox open beside a bench that didn't actually need fixing, because he'd long since run out of genuine repairs and had simply never stopped finding reasons to kneel beside her on Saturday mornings. The dais still stood at the center of the festival grounds, moved there permanently at Osgood's insistence after that autumn's gathering, its birch-inlaid sandpiper worn smooth and bright by a year of curious hands tracing its shape. 3 other couples had used it since. A young Vulpine man who'd lost his hearing in a construction accident, an elderly human woman who no longer trusted her hips to a full day of standing, a pair of nervous teenagers who simply liked how the low, level platform let them stand exactly eye to eye with everyone watching. Osgood had taken, in his dry way, to calling it Wren's Landing, and the name had stuck the way good names in small towns always do, quietly and forever. Mrs. Okonkwo had stopped Caleb only last week to report, with great satisfaction, that she no longer felt sad about her Saturdays at all, and that she'd like credit, historically speaking, for having asked the right question first. The young men from the boathouse, if they still thought anything unkind, no longer said it within Caleb's hearing, which he considered, on balance, a fair enough outcome for people who would likely never fully understand what they'd almost never gotten the chance to witness. Iris had moved in 2 streets over from the little house Caleb and Wren had bought together that spring. A squat, sturdy cottage with a wide, sun-warmed porch and doorways he'd widened himself, board by board, on quiet weeknights after work, the same patient, unglamorous labor that had first drawn her attention beneath a willow tree 18 months before. He'd built the ramps into the design from the very first sketch, so that nothing about the house announced itself as an accommodation. It simply worked, the way a well-built thing simply works, without apology or explanation. "Do you ever think about it?" Wren asked him, that second autumn, watching the same heron pick its way through the same shallows that always favored this time of year. "The version of this where you never bought 2 coffees by accident." "Every day," Caleb admitted. "Mostly so I can be grateful I'm not living in it. I used to think love was supposed to be easy," she said, echoing, without quite meaning to, the thing she told him that very first difficult summer. "I don't think that anymore. I think it's supposed to be sturdy. Easy things break the first time weather gets bad. I wanted sturdy. I just didn't know, for a long time, that I was allowed to ask for it." "You didn't have to ask," Caleb said, taking her hand, watching the same ducks that had first brought them together paddle in slow, unbothered circles across water gone gold with morning light. "I'd already decided. Somewhere around the second Saturday, if you're keeping records." She laughed. The real laugh, the one that still, after everything, sounded faintly surprised to be allowed, and leaned into him, and the willow tree went on trailing its branches into the lake, patient and unhurried, the way it had for decades before they'd arrived and would, they both liked to think, for decades after, long after the two of them had become just another old story the park told about itself. The carpenter and the climber, who found each other by accident and chose each other, deliberately, every single Saturday after